Nobody noticed the woman standing alone beneath the crystal chandeliers when she first stepped into the room. Monica Brooks paused just inside the grand entrance of the Whitmore Foundation Winter Gala, smoothing the sleeve of her elegant navy evening dress as warm golden light spilled across polished marble floors and towering floral arrangements that looked as though they had been arranged one blossom at a time. She had attended charity events before, but never one quite like this, where billion-dollar conversations drifted through the air as easily as the soft notes of a live string quartet. Around her, tailored tuxedos, shimmering gowns, and effortless smiles blended into a portrait of wealth that seemed almost rehearsed. Monica inhaled slowly, reminding herself why she had accepted the invitation. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there because the foundation had recognized years of volunteer work that rarely appeared in newspapers and never came with applause. Yet within moments of entering the ballroom, she realized she had become impossible to ignore for all the wrong reasons. A hostess glanced at the seating chart before looking back at Monica with a polite smile that disappeared almost instantly. "One moment," she said, quietly stepping away. Minutes passed. Guests streamed around Monica, as if she were part of the decor rather than another invited attendee. Conversations paused when people looked in her direction, only to resume in hushed voices after they turned away. Monica had experienced enough rooms like this throughout her life to recognize the pattern. Nobody said she didn't belong. Nobody needed to. It lived in the brief hesitation before a greeting, in the uncertain smiles that never reached the eyes, and in the subtle decision to look somewhere else. Finally, another coordinator approached carrying a place card. "Right this way, Ms. Brooks." Monica offered a grateful smile and followed her through rows of elegantly dressed guests until they reached a beautifully decorated round table near the center of the ballroom. Before Monica could even pull out her chair, one of the couples already seated there leaned toward the coordinator and whispered something. The coordinator's face tightened. She apologized softly to Monica before lifting the place card once again. "I'm terribly sorry. There appears to have been a seating adjustment." Monica nodded with quiet grace. "That's perfectly all right. It wasn't the first adjustment, nor would it be the last." The second table lasted less than 30 seconds. At the third, a businessman suddenly remembered he had promised to sit beside another donor. At the fourth, someone politely explained that the remaining seats had already been reserved. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed an invisible wall no one dared acknowledge aloud. Monica never argued. She thanked each person with the same calm smile, even as her fingers tightened around the small evening clutch she carried. Somewhere above her, laughter echoed beneath sparkling chandeliers while waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays filled with sparkling water and carefully prepared hors d'oeuvres. The music never stopped. Neither did the quiet judgment. A woman wearing an emerald designer gown watched Monica from across the room before leaning toward her companion with a faint smirk. The words never reached Monica's ears, but the shared glance did. So did the sympathetic look from an older server who had likely witnessed scenes like this more times than anyone realized. Monica lifted her chin anyway. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that dignity was something no stranger could take unless you handed it away yourself. So she stood patiently near the edge of the ballroom, hands folded gently before her, refusing to let disappointment rewrite the kindness that had carried her through every difficult chapter of her life. What Monica didn't know was that outside the hotel entrance, a convoy of sleek black luxury vehicles had just come to a silent stop, and inside the lead car sat a man whose arrival every guest had been anticipating, completely unaware that before the evening was over, he would walk past every famous face in the room for only one person. Outside, photographers adjusted their cameras toward the hotel entrance while television reporters rehearsed introductions they had delivered many times before whenever influential names gathered under one roof. Inside the ballroom, however, Monica Brooks remained completely without a place, standing only a few feet from the center of the room. The event coordinator returned once again, offering another apologetic smile that looked increasingly strained as she explained that a final configuration was still being sorted out. Monica thanked her with the same warmth she had offered every time before, refusing to let the coordinator's stress grow on her account. She quietly moved toward the periphery, realizing it was better to stand than to endure another silent rejection at a table. For one hopeful moment, Monica believed the awkwardness might simply fade into the background if she stayed out of the way. She stood near a towering arrangement of white orchids, watching the ballroom come alive with polished speeches, sparkling glasses, and effortless laughter. Across the ballroom, several conversations slowed as people noticed her standing there alone. No one openly commented, yet curiosity spread from table to table. A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Others simply looked away, unwilling to acknowledge what was unfolding in front of them. Monica could almost hear her grandmother's steady voice from years ago. People reveal themselves long before they reveal their opinions. She had not fully understood those words as a little girl growing up in Baltimore, but she understood them perfectly now. Every smile, every hesitation, every carefully chosen excuse painted a picture far clearer than direct words ever could. She refused to let that picture define her. A young server carrying a silver tray slowed beside her. "Would you like some sparkling water, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Monica accepted the glass with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. You have been working hard tonight." The young man smiled with visible relief, perhaps because she was the first guest all evening who had noticed him instead of simply reaching for another drink. "I hope you enjoy the event," he said before disappearing back into the crowd. Monica watched him weave through elegantly dressed strangers and thought about how easily people overlooked those who quietly kept everything running. Her invitation had never been about recognition. The Whitmore Foundation had honored hundreds of volunteers over the years, and she had almost declined when the letter arrived. She had accepted only because the community center where she volunteered insisted that someone represent their neighborhood. The children there had celebrated when they heard she was attending. They had even helped her choose the navy dress she now wore, insisting it made her look like someone who changes lives. Remembering their excitement softened the sting of the evening. If they could have seen her now, standing alone while tables filled around her, they would have reminded her that kindness was never measured by applause. Suddenly, the ballroom lighting shifted slightly, signaling the arrival of the evening's distinguished guest. Conversations faded into whispers almost instantly. Phones were discreetly lifted. Several executives adjusted their jackets. The foundation president hurried toward the entrance with an expression that mixed excitement and nervous anticipation. Even the musicians subtly changed tempo as hotel staff opened the towering doors leading into the grand lobby. Monica noticed the transformation before she knew its cause. It was remarkable how quickly an entire room could change direction because of one person's arrival. She remained where she was, taking a quiet sip of sparkling water, completely unaware that the man everyone had been waiting for had already stepped inside the building, and that with every measured step across the marble lobby, the distance between his path and hers was becoming smaller. The towering ballroom doors opened without fanfare, yet the atmosphere shifted so completely that even the quiet conversations dissolved into respectful silence. Ethan Park stepped inside with the calm confidence of someone who had long ago stopped noticing the attention he commanded. His charcoal tuxedo was impeccably tailored, his dark hair neatly combed, and his composed expression revealed almost nothing to the dozens of influential guests eager to earn a moment of his time. Behind him, several members of his professional security team maintained a respectful distance, while Foundation executives hurried forward with welcoming smiles and carefully rehearsed greetings. Hands extended toward him from every direction. Distinguished donors introduced themselves once again despite having met him before. Business leaders adjusted their posture, hoping to make a memorable impression. Reporters lifted cameras, anticipating the perfect photograph that would appear on tomorrow morning's front pages. Ethan acknowledged each greeting with quiet courtesy, offering measured smiles and brief handshakes. Yet his attention never seemed fully anchored to the conversations surrounding him. His observant eyes moved naturally across the ballroom, taking in details most people overlooked. He noticed the elderly volunteer carefully straightening a centerpiece after someone accidentally brushed against it. He noticed a nervous young musician adjusting sheet music with trembling fingers before the next performance. He noticed a waiter discreetly replacing a dropped napkin before anyone at the table realized it had fallen. Then, almost without intending to, his gaze settled on a woman standing alone near an arrangement of white orchids. Monica Brooks remained exactly where she had been moments earlier, holding a nearly untouched glass of sparkling water while watching the celebration unfold around her. She was not staring at anyone. She was not trying to attract attention. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that somehow stood apart from the carefully polished confidence filling the room. Ethan noticed something else. Every table near her appeared full, yet none of them had truly welcomed her. He watched another coordinator glance apologetically toward Monica before quickly looking away. He observed two guests whispering after noticing her standing alone. He did not hear their words, but he recognized the uncomfortable rhythm of exclusion. Years spent negotiating with powerful people had taught him that silence often revealed more than conversation. The foundation president continued, explaining the evening's program with enthusiastic energy, describing charitable initiatives, scholarship funds, and future partnerships, but Ethan's attention drifted once again toward the woman by the orchids. There was no bitterness on her face, no visible frustration, only patience. That, more than anything else, caught his interest. Most people masked disappointment with forced smiles or restless movements. Monica didn't either. She simply waited with the same grace she had shown since entering the ballroom, as though she believed her character mattered more than anyone else's opinion. Nearby, two younger guests quietly exchanged observations without realizing Ethan could hear fragments of their conversation. One shrugged and said that perhaps she had arrived with the wrong invitation. The other suggested she looked out of place among major donors. Neither statement was spoken with open cruelty, but both carried the comfortable certainty of people who had judged an entire life after only a passing glance. Ethan's expression remained unchanged, although something thoughtful settled behind his eyes. Across the room, Monica accepted another warm smile from the same young server who had offered her sparkling water earlier. She thanked him again after he asked whether she needed anything else. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it revealed more about her than any formal introduction could have. She noticed people others ignored. She spoke with genuine appreciation instead of expectation. While countless influential guests focused on being recognized, she quietly recognized someone else. Ethan had always believed that respect flowed most naturally toward those who offered it freely, without calculating what they might receive in return. As the evening host invited everyone to prepare for the opening ceremony, the crowd instinctively shifted closer to the stage. Guests hurried to secure favorable seats before the speeches began. Monica remained standing near the edge of the ballroom, unwilling to interrupt anyone else's arrangements. She seemed perfectly prepared to spend the evening unseen if that was what circumstance demanded. Ethan watched her for one final moment before calmly excusing himself from the foundation president in the middle of an introduction. The startled executive paused, uncertain where his honored guest intended to go, because instead of walking toward the reserved table prepared especially for him at the front of the ballroom, Ethan quietly turned in an entirely different direction, leaving a trail of confused eyes following every measured step. Every conversation in the ballroom seemed to slow without anyone fully understanding why. Ethan Park did not hurry, yet every measured step carried an authority that quietly redirected the attention of hundreds of guests. The foundation president hesitated in mid-sentence before following a few paces behind, assuming Ethan had noticed an important donor somewhere across the room. Several executives immediately adjusted their jackets and prepared welcoming smiles, convinced he was approaching their table. Others subtly stepped into his path, hoping for an introduction or at least a handshake that photographers might capture. Ethan acknowledged each attempt with a courteous nod, but he never broke stride. His destination remained unchanged. Monica Brooks had been studying the evening program printed on thick ivory paper, giving herself something to focus on besides the uncomfortable awareness that nearly everyone around her seemed to have found a place except her. She barely noticed the sudden hush spreading through the ballroom until she sensed dozens of eyes looking in the same direction. Assuming another distinguished guest had arrived, she instinctively stepped a little farther aside so others could pass more easily. She had spent much of her life making room for people without expecting anyone to notice. Then polished black shoes stopped only a few feet away from her. Monica slowly lifted her eyes. Ethan Park stood before her with the same calm expression he had worn since entering the ballroom, but now his complete attention rested on her alone. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Around them, conversations dissolved into complete silence. Even the string quartet seemed quieter, their gentle melody fading beneath the weight of anticipation. Filling the room, Monica wondered whether she should move again, convinced he must be looking for someone standing behind her. She glanced over her shoulder. There was no one else. Ethan offered a warm, respectful smile that reached his eyes before extending his hand. "Good evening. You must be Ms. Monica Brooks." The simple greeting caught her completely by surprise. She accepted the handshake with quiet composure despite the astonishment surrounding them. "Yes," she answered softly. "It is very nice to meet you, Mr. Park." His handshake was firm but unhurried, carrying none of the performative confidence that often accompanied powerful people. Instead, he spoke as though they had already been properly introduced long before tonight. "The pleasure is mine," he replied. "I have been hoping we would have the opportunity to meet." The words rippled through the ballroom like an unexpected gust of wind. Nearby guests exchanged confused glances. Several Foundation board members looked toward one another with raised eyebrows, silently searching for an explanation that none of them possessed. A photographer instinctively lowered his camera for a moment, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. The woman who had earlier insisted an empty chair was already reserved stared openly now, her confident smile replaced by visible disbelief. Monica herself looked almost embarrassed by the attention. "I think there may be some mistake," she said with gentle honesty. "I do not believe we have ever met." Ethan's smile widened slightly. "Not yet," he answered. "But I know enough to believe this introduction is long overdue." His response carried no grand performance, only sincere conviction. The Foundation president finally reached them, breathing a little faster after weaving through the crowd. "Mr. Park," he said carefully, "your table is ready whenever you are." Ethan glanced briefly toward the elaborate table reserved in the front row beneath the stage lights, where influential donors and honored guests waited expectantly. Then he looked back at Monica. "Would you mind doing me the honor of joining me this evening?" he asked. Monica blinked, momentarily unable to answer. She had spent the last hour wondering whether she belonged in the room at all. Now the evening's most anticipated guest was inviting her to stand beside him before the entire ballroom. Around them, every face seemed frozen between curiosity and astonishment. No speech had been given. No dramatic announcement had been made. Yet, with one respectful question, Ethan had quietly changed the center of gravity in the room. And for the first time that evening, Monica realized that every person who had overlooked her only moments before was now waiting to see what she would say next. Monica hesitated for only a heartbeat before offering a gracious smile that reflected years of quiet confidence rather than sudden excitement. "Thank you," she said softly. "I would be honored." Ethan inclined his head with genuine appreciation, as though she had done him the favor instead of the other way around. Without another word, he stepped slightly to one side and gestured for her to walk beside him rather than behind him. It was a small gesture, almost invisible unless someone was paying close attention, yet everyone in the ballroom noticed. The distance between them spoke louder than any speech could have. They crossed the polished marble floor together at an unhurried pace, while hundreds of eyes followed every step. The reserved front table, decorated with white roses and crystal centerpieces, suddenly seemed less important than the simple act of two people walking side by side. Guests who had eagerly waited for Ethan's arrival now found themselves studying Monica instead, searching their memories for a reason they had overlooked someone whom he clearly respected. The Foundation president quickly hurried ahead and personally pulled back 2 chairs. Ethan thanked him before gently pulling out Monica's chair himself. She looked at him with quiet surprise. "You did not have to do that," she said. Ethan smiled. "I wanted to." There was no performance in his voice, no attempt to impress the crowd. He simply waited until she was comfortably seated before taking the chair beside her. Around the table, several influential donors exchanged uncertain smiles. Only minutes earlier they had expected to spend the evening discussing investments and charitable partnerships with Ethan. Now they realized the evening had already taken a direction none of them had anticipated. A woman wearing an elegant silver gown leaned toward another guest and whispered, "Who is she?" Across the table, an older philanthropist quietly answered, "I do not know, but apparently we should have known." The atmosphere shifted with remarkable speed. The same event staff who had struggled to find Monica a seat moments earlier now arrived almost instantly with fresh place settings, polished silverware, and a personalized menu. The coordinator who had repeatedly apologized earlier approached once more, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Ms. Brooks," she said sincerely, "I owe you an apology for the confusion this evening." Monica offered her the same gentle smile she had worn all night. "You have been working very hard. Please do not worry about it." The coordinator looked almost emotional before quietly thanking her and returning to her duties. Ethan observed the exchange without interrupting. Kindness offered after disappointment often revealed more about a person's character than kindness offered during comfort. A server approached to refill water glasses, but his hands trembled slightly from nervousness. Monica noticed immediately and smiled reassuringly. "Everything looks wonderful," she said. "You are doing a great job." The young man relaxed almost instantly, thanking her before continuing around the table with renewed confidence. Ethan watched the interaction with thoughtful eyes. She had received very little generosity that evening, yet she continued creating it for everyone around her. That quality could not be purchased, rehearsed, or displayed for recognition. It simply existed within her. As dinner service began, the Master of Ceremonies welcomed everyone and thanked the Foundation's leading supporters. Several prominent names were recognized with enthusiastic applause. Monica joined every round of applause with genuine warmth, celebrating strangers she had never met. She expected nothing in return. During a brief pause between courses, Ethan finally turned toward her. "May I ask you something?" Monica nodded. "Of course. Earlier," he said calmly, "when they kept moving your seat from table to table, why did you never complain?" Monica looked down for a moment before answering with quiet honesty. "Because I have learned that forcing someone to make room for you rarely changes what is in their heart. I would rather wait for a place where I am truly welcome than argue for one where I am merely tolerated." Ethan remained silent for several seconds, absorbing every word. Around them, conversation continued, but somehow the room felt different now. Respect had begun moving through the ballroom in a way invitations, wealth, and social status never could, and although almost no one understood why Ethan had chosen to spend the evening beside Monica Brooks, every person present could already feel that the most important story of the night had only just begun. The first course had barely been cleared when the Foundation chairman stepped onto the stage and welcomed the audience once again, thanking every sponsor whose generosity had made the evening possible. Polite applause filled the ballroom, but many guests were paying far less attention to the speech than to the unusual pairing at the front table. Ethan Park remained fully engaged in his quiet conversation with Monica Brooks, listening with the kind of patience that powerful people rarely offered so freely. The contrast fascinated everyone watching. Across the room, assumptions began changing faster than facts. Some guests convinced themselves Monica must secretly lead a major charitable organization. Others guessed she was an influential advisor whose accomplishments had simply escaped public attention. Nobody imagined the truth was much simpler. Monica had spent years volunteering 3 evenings every week at a neighborhood community center on the west side of Chicago, mentoring children after school, organizing food drives, and helping elderly neighbors complete paperwork they found confusing. She never posted photographs online. She never sought awards. To her, service had always been something measured in quiet afternoons rather than public recognition. Ethan finally asked, the question that had remained in his thoughts since noticing her near the orchids. "May I ask how you became involved with the Whitmore Foundation?" Monica smiled gently before answering. "The foundation supports the community center where I volunteer. They sent me an invitation because some of the families nominated me. Honestly, I almost stayed home." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Why?" She laughed softly. "Because I thought someone else deserved the invitation more than I did." Ethan looked at her for several seconds before replying. "People who say that are often the ones who deserve it most." Monica lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable receiving praise. Before she could answer, the Master of Ceremonies invited everyone to watch a short presentation celebrating volunteers whose work had quietly transformed local neighborhoods. The ballroom lights dimmed as images appeared across 2 enormous screens. Families receiving meals, children reading books, senior citizens smiling beside volunteers. The room watched politely until one particular photograph appeared. A familiar face stood surrounded by laughing children holding freshly planted flowers outside a renovated community garden. Monica froze for an instant. It was a picture taken almost 2 years earlier during a neighborhood cleanup project. She had forgotten it had ever been taken. Around the ballroom, heads turned almost simultaneously toward the front table. The screen continued showing photographs of tutoring sessions, holiday meal deliveries, and youth workshops. Monica appeared again and again, never standing in the center, always helping someone else shine. The narrator calmly explained that one volunteer had contributed more than 6,000 hours over the past decade without requesting public recognition or accepting personal compensation. Several guests slowly realized they had spent the first hour of the evening overlooking the very person being honored by the foundation itself. The woman in the emerald gown who had whispered earlier lowered her eyes in visible embarrassment. The businessman who had suddenly remembered another colleague needed his seat shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even the coordinator who had repeatedly moved Monica's place card covered her mouth as realization settled over her. When the presentation ended, the applause began cautiously before growing into a standing ovation that echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. Monica looked genuinely overwhelmed. She instinctively started applauding the volunteers shown beside her instead of accepting the recognition directed toward herself. Ethan remained standing as well, but instead of looking toward the stage, he looked directly at Monica while applauding with quiet sincerity. There was no trace of obligation in the gesture. It was simple respect. The foundation chairman returned to the microphone with a smile. "There are many generous people in this room tonight," he said, "but generosity becomes extraordinary when nobody is watching." Monica's eyes shimmered with emotion, though she held herself with the same calm dignity she had carried since arriving. Ethan leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a voice only she could hear. "I suspected there was a reason you remained so gracious after everything that happened earlier." Monica answered with the smallest smile. "Kindness is easier to keep than resentment. It weighs a lot less." Ethan quietly nodded. In that moment, he understood that the room had not misjudged Monica because of anything she lacked. They had misjudged her because they had been looking for importance in the wrong places all along. When the applause finally softened and everyone returned to their seats, the atmosphere inside the ballroom no longer resembled the one that had greeted Monica Brooks earlier that evening. The same faces that had quietly dismissed her now carried expressions of curiosity mixed with unmistakable regret. Conversations resumed, but they sounded different now, slower and more thoughtful, as though every guest had suddenly become aware that first impressions could reveal far more about the observer than the person being observed. The foundation chairman smiled warmly before addressing the audience once again. "There is one more recognition we would like to share tonight," he announced. "This was not included in the printed program, because one of our guests specifically requested that no special attention be given. Unfortunately for her, we believe gratitude should never remain hidden forever." Soft laughter drifted through the room as the chairman turned toward Monica. "Ms. Brooks, would you please join me on stage?" Monica looked genuinely startled. She instinctively glanced toward Ethan, almost as if asking whether she should accept. He offered only a small nod of encouragement. "They are inviting the person you truly are," he said quietly. "Let them meet her." Monica rose with the same quiet grace that had defined every moment of the evening and walked toward the stage without seeking applause or acknowledgement. The audience stood once again, this time before she even reached the podium. She looked humbled rather than proud, offering grateful smiles while gently motioning for everyone to sit. When she reached the microphone, she adjusted it slightly before speaking in a calm voice that carried effortlessly across the ballroom. "Thank you for your kindness," she began. "But I hope tonight is never only about me. Every community has people who quietly show up every single day without expecting anyone to notice. Teachers who stay late, neighbors who check on elderly families, volunteers who spend weekends helping children believe in themselves. I have simply been fortunate enough to work beside those people." The room fell completely silent. There was nothing rehearsed about her words. No dramatic pauses. No attempt to impress. She spoke exactly as she had spoken to the young server earlier, with honesty that required no decoration. "When someone offers kindness," Monica continued, "they rarely know where it will end. A meal shared today might become hope tomorrow. A few encouraging words might become someone's reason to keep going. We may never see the results of the good we do, but that does not mean those results do not exist. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others nodded almost unconsciously. Ethan listened without moving, his expression thoughtful as though every sentence confirmed something he had sensed from the moment he first saw her standing alone beside the white orchids. When Monica finished, the applause returned once more, but this time it carried genuine admiration instead of polite obligation. As she prepared to leave the stage, the chairman unexpectedly handed her a crystal award engraved with the foundation's highest volunteer recognition. Monica accepted it carefully before smiling. "May I ask one favor?" she said. The chairman nodded. "Of course." Monica looked toward the volunteers seated near the back of the ballroom. "Would it be all right if they joined me for this photograph? None of us ever does this work alone." The chairman smiled broadly. "I think that would make this evening even better." Several volunteers, some dressed in simple suits they had worn for years, walked forward with visible hesitation. Monica greeted every one of them by name before making certain they stood in the front rather than behind her. Cameras flashed across the ballroom as photographers captured the moment. Ethan remained seated, quietly watching the scene unfold. One of the foundation board members leaned toward him and asked in a low voice, "Did you already know she was receiving this award?" Ethan shook his head. "No," he answered. "I only knew that people who notice everyone else are usually the ones worth noticing." The board member followed his gaze toward Monica, now laughing gently with the volunteers while making sure each of them held the award for the photographs. It became impossible to tell who had come to honor whom, and perhaps that was exactly why every person in the ballroom finally understood that true greatness had never entered the room demanding attention. It had arrived quietly, waited patiently, and revealed itself only after everyone else had finished looking in the wrong direction. As the final photographs concluded, the volunteers returned to their tables carrying smiles that no award could have created on its own. Monica Brooks carefully placed the crystal recognition beside her plate as though it belonged to everyone who had stood beside her rather than to herself alone. When she returned to her seat, several guests who had barely acknowledged her earlier slowly approached with expressions that revealed a quiet struggle between embarrassment and sincerity. The woman in the emerald gown was the first to arrive. She stopped beside the table for a moment before speaking. "Ms. Brooks, I owe you an apology. Earlier this evening, I formed an opinion before giving myself the chance to know you. I was wrong." Monica looked up with the same gentle expression she had carried all evening. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "We all have moments we wish we could do differently." The woman seemed almost surprised that there was no trace of resentment in Monica's voice. She smiled gratefully before returning to her table with noticeably lighter shoulders. Soon afterward, the businessman who had claimed another colleague needed his seat approached as well. He extended his hand respectfully. "I hope you will accept my apology too. Looking back now, I realized I was protecting my comfort instead of practicing the values this event is supposed to celebrate." Monica shook his hand warmly. Acknowledging it takes courage. That matters. One by one, conversations throughout the ballroom quietly changed direction. Guests who had spent the beginning of the evening discussing business opportunities and investment portfolios now found themselves speaking about community service, mentorship, and the people who had quietly shaped their own lives years earlier. It was as though Monica's presence had gently redirected the purpose of the entire gala without ever trying to do so. Ethan watched the transformation with thoughtful satisfaction. He had not confronted anyone. He had not delivered a speech about respect or fairness. He had simply chosen where to walk, where to sit, and whose dignity deserved to be recognized. Sometimes the most powerful lesson required remarkably few words. The foundation chairman returned to the microphone for the closing remarks and paused before reading his prepared notes. He folded the paper instead. "I plan to end this evening by thanking our sponsors," he said with a smile. "They certainly deserve our gratitude. But tonight reminded me of something even more important. A successful charity event is not measured only by the amount of money it raises. It is measured by whether the people inside this room leave with more compassion than they brought with them." The audience answered with heartfelt applause. Nearby, the young server who had offered Monica sparkling water earlier passed her table once more. This time dozens of guests thanked him by name as he worked. He looked pleasantly surprised by the sudden appreciation. Monica noticed his smile and quietly smiled back. Ethan leaned toward her. You changed more than you realized tonight. Monica gently shook her head. No, people change themselves. They simply needed the opportunity. Ethan considered her answer before smiling. Perhaps that is what real leadership looks like. As dessert was served, the ballroom felt warmer somehow, although nothing about the elegant chandeliers or polished marble had changed. The difference existed entirely within the people gathered beneath them. Laughter sounded more genuine. Introductions became more sincere. Volunteers and donors sat together exchanging stories instead of titles. Before the evening ended, several guests privately committed new resources to the community center where Monica volunteered, not because they wished to impress Ethan Park, but because they had finally understood the quiet impact one devoted person could have over many years. Monica accepted every conversation with the same humility she had shown when standing alone beside the orchids. She never mentioned the uncomfortable beginning of the evening. She never reminded anyone how they had treated her. She allowed grace to complete what judgment had begun, and in doing so she gave everyone in the ballroom something far more valuable than forgiveness alone. She gave them the rare chance to become better than they had been only a few hours earlier. The evening slowly drew to a close as the last conversations lingered beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, yet no one seemed eager to leave. Something far more valuable than another successful fundraising gala had taken place inside the ballroom. People who had arrived expecting to celebrate generosity were leaving with a deeper understanding of what generosity truly looked like. Monica Brooks stood near the entrance speaking quietly with several volunteers from her community center, laughing softly as they shared stories about children who had finally learned to read, neighbors who had rebuilt their lives after difficult seasons, and families who had discovered hope through simple acts of compassion. She spoke with the same warmth she had offered every person throughout the evening, whether they had welcomed her immediately or only after realizing who she was. There was no bitterness in her voice because she had never measured her worth by someone else's first impression. Ethan Park remained nearby, watching without interrupting. The foundation chairman eventually approached him with a grateful smile. "Mr. Park," he said, "I have attended charity events for almost 30 years, and I do not believe I have ever witnessed a room transform the way this one did tonight." Ethan glanced toward Monica before answering. Rooms do not change on their own. People choose whether they see with their eyes or with their assumptions. The chairman quietly nodded, understanding the truth behind those words. Outside, photographers gathered once more as guests prepared to leave the hotel. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance while flashes from cameras illuminated the evening air. Many expected Ethan to depart surrounded by influential donors or prominent business leaders. Instead, when Monica and the volunteers stepped outside, Ethan walked toward them without hesitation. He thanked each volunteer personally for the time they had invested in strengthening their community. Several of them looked genuinely surprised that someone with his reputation knew how to ask thoughtful questions about after-school programs, neighborhood gardens, and food pantries. Before Monica entered the shuttle that would take the volunteers home, Ethan handed her a simple white envelope bearing only the foundation's seal. She accepted it with quiet curiosity. "You should open it later," he said. "It belongs to your community, not to me." Monica smiled warmly. "Thank you, but you have already done more than enough tonight." Ethan gently shook his head. Respect is never enough by itself. Sometimes respect should also become opportunity. After exchanging a grateful handshake, Monica boarded the shuttle with the other volunteers. As the vehicle disappeared into the city lights, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Ethan along with confirmation of a 5-year commitment to fully fund the expansion of the community center where she had volunteered for so many years. There was no mention of his own name on the public announcement, only the words, "In honor of those who serve when no one is watching." Monica closed her eyes for a brief moment, deeply moved not by the amount of support, but by the understanding behind it. Weeks later, the photograph that spread across newspapers and social media was not the one featuring celebrity donors or influential executives standing beneath glittering chandeliers. The image people shared most often captured a single quiet moment. Ethan Park walking across an elegant ballroom, while everyone else watched, choosing to stand beside a woman whom others had overlooked only minutes before. Journalists debated the meaning of the photograph. Comment sections filled with reflections about kindness, humility, and dignity. Yet the people who had witnessed the evening firsthand understood that the photograph represented something much simpler. It captured the exact moment when one person's decision reminded an entire room that character is never measured by appearance, status, or popularity. It is revealed by the respect we offer when we believe no one important is watching. And on that unforgettable night, everyone discovered that the most remarkable person in the ballroom had never been the one with the greatest influence, but the one whose quiet compassion had changed every heart without asking for recognition, and the world left with a clearer memory of what true dignity looks like.